My husband took his mistress to the Maldives on our anniversary. I didn't reply. I sold the penthouse and left the country. When they returned, the home he bragged about was no longer his. The text came in at 6:14 a.m. I was folding a silk dress, the green one, the one I'd bought specifically for this trip, when my phone lit up on the bed. Adrian's name. I assumed it was a last-minute packing question, the kind of domestic check-in that had become our version of intimacy. Did you grab the adapters? Where's the sunscreen? I set the dress down and read it. Elena, don't come to the airport. I'm taking Qley instead. She's 24, exciting, and deserves this trip more than you. We'll discuss lawyers when I return. Don't call me crying. I read it twice. The silk dress was still warm from my hands. Outside, the city was already moving, 42 floors below us, indifferent and continuous. I laughed, not the broken kind. Not the kind that precedes crying, the sound a person makes when the pain is too sudden to take any other shape. The other kind. The kind that comes from a very quiet, very cold place that you didn't know you had until the moment you needed it. Because Adrian had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. He was brilliant with real estate, multi-million-dollar developments, commercial portfolios spread across 4 cities. The kind of man who walked into rooms like he already owned them, who read contracts the way other people read menus, casually, with the confidence of someone who knew what they wanted. He just forgot to check whether he actually owned this one. I should tell you who I was before I tell you who I became. My name is Elena Vasquez Cross. I'm 38 years old. I spent the first decade of my career as a trust and estate attorney at Harrington & Cole, a mid-sized but quietly influential firm in Chicago that specialized in the kind of wealth management that never appeared in press releases. I left private practice at 33 to manage the financial affairs of my late Aunt Beatrice, who was, depending on whom you asked, either an eccentric recluse or one of the shrewdest real estate investors in the Midwest. The correct answer was both. Beatrice died 18 months before the morning I'm describing. Pancreatic cancer, 9 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 71, and she faced it the way she faced everything. Organized, unsentimental, and 3 steps ahead of everyone around her. She'd been updating her estate documents since her 50s. When she died, the administration of her trust transferred without a single legal complication, which was exactly what she'd intended. I met Adrian Cross at a charity auction 4 years before she died. He was 41, the founder of Cross Development Group, and he had the specific magnetism of a man who had earned his confidence through work rather than inheritance. He was also genuinely funny, which I'd stopped expecting from men in his income bracket. We dated for 14 months. He proposed on a Tuesday evening with no ceremony and the exact right ring, which should have been a compliment, and looking back was actually a warning. He paid attention to detail when it cost him something. We married on a Saturday in October. 60 guests. A dinner that went until 2 a.m. The penthouse was a wedding gift, not from Adrian, from Beatrice. She'd pulled me aside at the reception, pressed a manila envelope into my hands, and said, "Your name, your holding company. Don't complicate it." She'd been sick by then, though we didn't know yet how sick. I thought the gesture was about love, which it was. I didn't realize until much later that it was also about foresight. Beatrice had spent 50 years watching women, intelligent, accomplished, careful women, lose everything in divorces because they'd trusted the wrong person with the paperwork. She had seen it in her own generation and in mine, and she'd made a decision, quietly and without fanfare, that it would not happen to her niece. The penthouse was purchased outright, $3.8 million earns cash, through a private holding company she'd structured and transferred to me in 2019, Vasquez Holdings LLC, my name only, my EIN, my attorney of record. Adrian's name appeared nowhere on the deed. For 3 years, the great developer had been living in my home without knowing it. I hadn't hidden it from him exactly. I'd simply never explained it. It was my apartment, my Aunt Beatrice's gift. Adrian knew Beatrice had bought it. He'd thanked her at Christmas with the particular warmth of a man who understood the value of an inherited asset. What he hadn't done, and this is the part that still stuns me when I think about it, was read the ownership documents. He'd assumed, of course he had, it was in his name in his mind, because things of value ended up in his name. That was the natural order. I set his text on the bedside table and picked up my phone. Then I called Marcus. Marcus Riley had been a luxury real estate broker in Chicago for 26 years. Before that, he'd spent a decade in commercial transactions at a firm that handled the kind of portfolio work that made ordinary real estate look like a hobby. He was 63, meticulous, and operated with the specific discretion of someone who had spent decades managing transactions for people who could not afford attention. He and I had worked together on 2 estate sales for Beatrice in the years before her death. He'd called me after the funeral, which I hadn't expected, and said simply, "If you ever need anything moved, call me first." At the time, I'd thought it was professional solicitation. I understood now that it was something more specific. I called him at 6:31 a.m. "I need to sell the penthouse," I said. A pause. Marcus was not a man easily surprised, but I heard him recalibrate. Timeline, 48 hours. Silence. The particular silence of a professional doing math. "Elena, that's aggressive." "I know. 20% below market. Cash buyers only. I want it gone before he lands." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Is the title clear?" "Completely. Vasquez Holdings. No co-owners, no liens, no complications." "Give me 4 hours." I hung up and walked to the window. 42 floors below, the city was accelerating into morning. Somewhere in this building, Adrian was in the elevator or the parking garage, rolling his Rimowa carry-on toward a car that would take take him to a woman half my age who did not yet know what he actually was. I watched the city for a while, then I started making a list. I want to be precise about the red flags, because they didn't arrive all at once. They arrived the way water damages a foundation, slowly, invisibly, until the day the floor gives way and you realize the damage has been there for years. The first one I noticed and buried was 14 months into the marriage. Adrian had always traveled for work, developments in Miami, investor meetings in New York, site visits in Dallas. I understood his calendar was not mine to supervise. I had my own work, my own schedule, my own life. But in February of our second year, he'd told me he was in Cincinnati for a site review, and I'd seen on a shared calendar we used for household logistics that the appointment had been logged as a personal day. When I mentioned it casually, not accusatorially, just, hey, the calendar shows a personal day, he'd looked at me with complete composure and said the corporate calendar and the shared calendar weren't synced, and I must be misreading it. I believed him. I filed it. The way you file things when you've chosen to trust someone, and the alternative is a confrontation you're not ready for. The second flag came 6 months later in August. A name, Qley. It appeared in a text I wasn't supposed to see, a message that slid across his phone screen while he was in the shower. Something about tonight and miss you. I saw it because I was sitting on my side of the bed and his phone was between us, and I have sharp eyes. When he came out, I didn't say anything. I told myself it was a colleague, an assistant, a client with poor professional boundaries. I told myself these things specifically because I didn't want to know the answer bad enough to ask the question. That was my failure. Not the only one, but the one I'm most honest about. The third flag was 3 weeks before our anniversary. I found a hotel confirmation in the email account we shared for travel bookings. We'd set it up years ago for points, one of those small logistical intimacies that accumulate in marriages. Qley Fushi, 2 guests, 6 nights. The reservation was in his name. The second guest name had been left as TBD. TBD. I sat with my laptop open and looked at that word for a long time. I want to tell you I confronted him immediately. I want to tell you I was decisive and clear-eyed. What actually happened was that I closed the laptop and went for a walk that lasted an hour and 15 minutes and covered approximately 4 miles and ended at a coffee shop where I sat alone for 40 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to order. When I got home, he was watching television and he kissed my cheek and I said nothing. I said nothing for 3 weeks. And then his text arrived at 6:14 a.m. and I didn't need to say anything ever again. Marcus called back at 11:07 a.m. 3 serious offers, he said. All cash, all motivated buyers. Highest is $3.4 million, but they want 2 weeks for due diligence. No, I said. Next. $3.2 million investment group out of Dubai. 48-hour close. Cash, minimal conditions. Done. Elena. A careful pause. You're leaving $200,000 on the table. Marcus, I said, I need this building sold before a specific person's flight lands from the Maldives. I'm not interested in premium pricing right now. A beat. Understood. And then, because Marcus had known Beatrice and therefore understood certain things about the women in my family, I'll have the purchase agreement to your attorney by 3. My attorney was a woman named Diana Cho, 44 years old, 15 years in Chicago real estate law, the kind of meticulous that makes other lawyers nervous and opposing counsel quietly desperate. Beatrice had used her for estate work for a decade. She was, among the handful of people I'd called that morning, the one I'd been most relieved to reach. Walk me through the Vasquez holding structure, Diana said when I called her at noon. I walked her through it. Adrian's name is nowhere in this chain. Correct. No marital property claims. Illinois law. The property was gifted to you before marriage, transferred through your private entity. He contributed $0 to purchase. Maintenance is paid through the holding company account. All correct. I have 3 years of records. Elena. A pause. And then the professional neutrality dropped for just a moment. Your aunt was a very smart woman. She was the smartest person I knew, I said. The purchase agreement came through at 3:14 p.m. I signed it electronically. Diana countersigned on behalf of Vasquez Holdings at 4:02 p.m. The wire confirmation for the earnest money came in at 5:49 p.m. $320,000, 10% of the sale price, landed in the Vasquez Holdings account while I was standing in Adrian's closet with 3 industrial garbage bags and a very clear head. I want to be honest about the closet. I'd been in it thousands of times. I'd hung dry cleaning in it, retrieved items from it, navigated around it in the dark on early mornings. His side was meticulous. 12 suits, all custom, a double row of dress shirts, shoes in individual boxes, watches in a velvet-lined drawer. He'd bought all of it with money from deals I'd helped him structure, not financially, but operationally. I'd reviewed contracts when he needed a second read. I'd managed the apartment so seamlessly that he'd never had to think about it. I'd been, for 6 years, the infrastructure of a life he was now handing to someone else via text message. I didn't slash anything, didn't bleach anything, didn't take scissors to a single lapel. That would have been emotional, and I was completely finished being emotional about Adrian Cross. I filled 3 garbage bags, tied them at the top, set them by the front door with the precision of someone leaving a gift. Then I packed my own things. Passport, both of them, US and Spanish, dual citizenship from my grandmother's side that Adrian had always found interesting and had never thought to consider strategically. Jewelry, original documents, my grandmother's ring, which I'd kept in a lockbox and never worn in the apartment because I hadn't wanted it to absorb the air of the place. Everything else stayed. The art I'd chosen, the furniture I'd sourced, the rugs I'd spent 3 3 months researching, the kitchen I'd renovated in year 2, the life I'd built quietly around a man who handed it to someone else at 6:14 in the morning. I felt nothing when I walked out. Not nothing. That's not quite right. I felt something that wasn't grief and wasn't anger and wasn't triumph. Something more like the specific lightness that happens when you've been carrying weight for long enough that you've stopped noticing it and then you set it down. The sale closed at 11:17 a.m. 2 days later. $3. $2 million landed in the Vasquez Holdings Swiss trust account. Beatrice had insisted on the Swiss structure, which I'd found excessive at the time and found clarifying now, before noon. Diana emailed me the final settlement statement with a single line beneath it. Congratulations on the successful transaction. Safe travels. Marcus called to confirm. Sterling Holdings Dubai has taken possession. They're flying a property manager in tomorrow. The access codes have been changed. Everything. Fob, locks, digital keypad. The concierge has been briefed. New owner protocol. No exceptions. The bags by the front door? The building's security team will hold them pending the new owner's instructions. A pause. I told them to leave them for collection. Perfect. I was at O'Hare when Marcus called. Gate K14. First class to Lisbon, departing at 2:45 p.m. I'd bought the ticket that morning, one way, which the booking system noted with a small orange flag, as if to warn me I'd forgotten the return leg. I hadn't forgotten. Before boarding, I opened Adrian's text one final time. Read it once more. The 24 exciting deserves this trip more than you. The don't call me crying. I typed 3 words. Enjoy the Maldives. Hit send. Powered off my phone. Walked to the women's restroom near the gate, took out the SIM card, broke it cleanly in half over the sink, and dropped the pieces into the waste bin. Boarded the flight. Slept the entire way to Lisbon. I didn't witness what happened when Adrian came home. I pieced it together over the following days from 3 sources. Diana, who had been contacted by Adrian's attorney within 48 hours of his return, Marcus, who received a call from the new building management describing the incident, and Priya Nair, a close friend and the one person besides Diana and Marcus I'd told about what I was doing before I did it. Priya described it to me over a video call, sitting on her couch in Lincoln Park with a glass of wine, with the specific relish of a woman who has watched a friend survive something and come out the other side intact. Adrian and Qley landed at O'Hare on a Thursday evening. Tanned, apparently, carrying the kind of luggage that signals you've been somewhere expensive. He was in good spirits, Priya told me, because his building's concierge had flagged him through the lobby doors the same way every evening for 3 years, and he'd had no reason to expect otherwise. The key fob wouldn't register. He tapped it twice, laughed, assumed a battery issue, tapped it 3 more times with the deliberate pressure of a man who believes in trying harder. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. The concierge, a man named David, who had worked the building's front desk for 9 years and had the particular composure of someone who has been briefed on exactly how to handle this, walked over. Mr. Cross, your building access was revoked by the new ownership. As of 48 hours ago, this building is under new private management. Adrian smiled, the smile of a man who has heard a ridiculous sentence and is being patient while the speaker corrects themselves. David, I own this building. You don't, sir, David said. And then, because he was a professional, I'm sorry. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor must have been its own special kind of descent. Priya, who had a contact in the building's management company, was told that Adrian had been led up by the security supervisor to retrieve personal property, a courtesy that Sterling Holdings Dubai had specifically authorized, accompanied by a security guard. He reached the door. New lock, new keypad. Nothing he entered worked. He pounded on the door the way men pound on things when they're afraid and don't want to look afraid. I'm told the sound carried in the hallway. The door opened. Not me. A private security contractor named Rohan, 6'3", former military, working weekend shifts for the new building management company, stood in the doorway of what had been my home for 6 years. This property belongs to Sterling Holdings Dubai, Rohan said. Sir, you're trespassing. Adrian's mouth moved. No sound. Rohan reached behind the door and brought out 3 black garbage bags. He set them in the hallway with the neutral efficiency of a man completing a task. One bag landed at an angle and split along the seam, and the contents, $12,000 of tailored Italian wool, spilled across the marble floor of the corridor. Ms. Elena asked me to pass these along. The door closed. The lock clicked. Qley had been standing slightly behind Adrian through all of this. She was 24. I knew from 6 months of peripheral awareness of her existence. Younger than I'd been when I'd started my legal career. Younger than I'd been when I'd first walked through Beatrice's apartment and understood that property was safety. She looked at the suits on the floor. She looked at Adrian. Whatever she saw in his face in that moment, it was apparently enough. Call me when you figure your life out, she said. She picked up her luggage and walked to the elevator without looking back. The doors closed on her and opened again, empty. And Adrian was alone in the hallway with 3 garbage bags and the sound of a lock he couldn't open behind him. His attorney contacted Diana the following morning. Jonathan Pierce, 13 years in Chicago family and property law, called Diana at 9:08 a.m. on a Friday. I know this because Diana, meticulous, careful, brilliant Diana, documented every communication in a file she sent me weekly while I was in Lisbon, which I appreciated both practically and as a piece of art. Jonathan opened with what Diana described as confident territorial language, phrases like marital asset and community interest and failure to disclose. Diana listened. She let him finish. Then she walked him through the Vasquez Vasquez holding structure, in the precise, unhurried way that very good lawyers explain things to other lawyers when they want the other lawyer to understand they've already lost. The property was purchased in 2019 before the marriage as a gift to Elena Vasquez from Beatrice Morales through Vasquez Holdings LLC. Elena was the sole member of the LLC. Adrian Cross had not contributed to the purchase price, the down payment, the maintenance costs, or the capital improvements. His name did not appear on the deed, the title insurance policy, the holding company operating agreement, or any instrument of record. Under Illinois law, Diana told Jonathan, this property was never marital property. There is nothing to contest. Jonathan pushed back with the specific persistence of an attorney who has been retained on a contingency basis and needs there to be something to argue. Diana let him push. Then she sent him, via email, a PDF containing the complete Vasquez Holdings ownership chain, the purchase history, the deed, the title policy, and 3 years of maintenance payment records from the holding company account. The email subject line was, Cross vs. Vasquez, complete property documentation. Jonathan did not respond for 4 hours. When he did, his email was 3 sentences long. The third sentence was, we will not be pursuing a property claim at this time. Diana forwarded it to me at 2:17 p.m. Lisbon time. I was sitting outside a cafe on a side street in Alfama, eating a pastel de nata and watching a cat cross the cobblestones. I read the email, put my phone back in my bag, finished the pastry. The divorce petition was filed 10 days later, initiated by Adrian, I assumed on the advice of Jonathan, who probably told him that initiating was better optics than waiting. Diana handled my side of it. No property dispute as established, no children. A clean dissolution of assets that were cleanly separated as Beatrice had ensured. The only contested item was a joint savings account containing $34,000, which Adrian's attorney argued was marital savings. Diana agreed it was, split it 50%, and the matter was resolved in a single exchange of emails. $17,000. That was what 6 years of my life cost Adrian Cross. He paid it the way he paid everything, without personally feeling it. I hope it stung eventually. I want to tell you about Lisbon, because stories like this don't end at the moment of justice. They end at the moment of becoming. I rented an apartment in Príncipe Real, 2nd floor, high ceilings, windows that opened onto a small garden, and a street so quiet at night I could hear my own thoughts for the first time in years. The building was 1890s construction, tile-faced, the kind of architecture that absorbs history and gives it back in light and proportion. I sat in that apartment for 2 days, doing nothing. No phone, no laptop, no schedule. Just the garden and the light and the specific silence of a city that didn't know me. On the third morning, I got up at 7 a.m. and walked for 4 hours. I cried once in a park near the Jardim da Estrela, on a bench. Not about Adrian, not specifically. More general than that. About the years of small silences I'd chosen over confrontations. About the Qley name I'd seen on a screen and filed away because I wasn't ready. About the hotel confirmation with the TBD second guess that I'd closed my laptop on and walked away from for 3 weeks instead of walking toward. I cried about the version of me who had known. Somewhere she didn't allow herself to look directly, for months, and had chosen the familiar over the true. I sat on that bench for a while. Then I got up and walked to a restaurant and ordered lunch and ate it slowly in the sun. The Brazilian novelist Clarice Lispector, I was reading her that month, the kind of reading you do when you're reconstructing yourself, wrote something I kept returning to in those early Lisbon weeks. The idea that cruelty is really just selfishness made structural. That the people who harm you are rarely evil. They are simply people who have arranged the world around their own comfort so completely that your pain doesn't register as real. Adrian wasn't a villain. He was a man who had organized his life around ease and expansion, who had treated me as infrastructure rather than person, who had handed me a text message instead of a conversation because a text message was easier, and he had decided, somewhere without quite deciding it, that I was owed nothing more than ease. He'd been wrong about the penthouse because he'd never checked. That was true. But I'd been wrong about things too. I'd known what the silences meant, and I'd chosen not to follow them. I'd been afraid, not of the answer, but of the loss, of the unbecoming that would follow finding out. I'd preferred a comfortable lie to an uncomfortable truth, which made 2 of us. The difference was what we did when the truth arrived anyway. Priya flew out to visit me in December. We drank wine on my apartment terrace and watched the lights come on across the city, and she told me, in the specific and detailed way that only good friends tell you things, that Adrian had been seen at an industry event in November, looking pale and distracted. That Qley had, as far as anyone could tell, not called. That his latest development in the South Loop had hit a financing wall and he was restructuring. Is that satisfying? She asked. I thought about it genuinely. Less than I expected, I said. She nodded. Beatrice would be pleased. Beatrice would be insufferably smug about the structure holding up. She'd have already told everyone. We laughed, the long, warm kind, and I felt something shift that had been sitting heavily in my chest since October. Diana filed the final dissolution paperwork in January. The divorce was granted on a Tuesday, uncontested, by a family court judge who spent approximately 11 minutes on our case, which felt both anticlimactic and exactly right. Diana sent me the signed order at 4:33 p.m. I read it sitting on the floor of my Lisbon apartment surrounded by books. I held the phone for a moment. Then I put it down and went out to get dinner. The last thing I want to say is this. Adrian sent that text because he thought it would humiliate me. The young woman, the exciting woman, The "you don't deserve this." He'd calculated, I think, that the specific cruelty of "don't call me crying" would be the wound, the preemptive dismissal of my grief, the denial of even the dignity of a real ending. He wanted me dissolved. He'd built the text carefully enough that I believe he thought about it, that he knew what he was doing, that he chose 6 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings and a marriage I'd made beautiful, and sent it away in 40 words on a phone screen, because he had decided that I was the kind of woman who could be handled that way. And he was right about one thing. Somebody got humiliated that week.